that we've lost ritual in our society. It is much larger than having a sip of coffee, if you will. It can be simple, but I think it's more complex than it is simple. One of the examples I use in the book about a mirroring effect with what happens on the screen is when indigenous people see someone walking on hot coals, or would a person that's in the group watching that, are they actually participating in the walking on the coals? No, they're sitting there watching, but it engages them and draws them so much that they begin to have this ritualistic experience. And so even like with church and communion, you go to communion, and it isn't an individual thing, it's a communal thing. It's something we do together.
Hello and welcome to The Naked Gospel, where we have conversations about sex, singleness, marriage, pornography, and everything in between. We bring on cultural thinkers, parents, important folk, and normal folk alike. I am your host, Shane O'Neill. If you're listening in, video versions of all of these episodes are available at YouTube, Proven Ministries. We have that below. If you're watching, you just rather listen in, then all of these episodes are available on every major podcast platform. Whether you're listening or watching, do subscribe and continue to track with us. Thank you for tuning in and enjoy the episode. Hey folks, I want to continue to invite you to join the Disruptor Initiative. The link will be down below. It allows you to shape this podcast. We named it the Disruptor Initiative because we want to disrupt and rebel alongside of our King, Jesus, as he leads his rebellion and builds his kingdom. How does it allow you to shape this podcast? You get to pick and inform the topics that we look at, as well as who we have on and the questions that we ask. You also get cool stuff, such as this Naked Gospel coffee mug. So the link will be down below. In vain with that conversation, we're going to look at ritual and media today. Even as I say ritual, it feels like an old, stale, kind of crusty word, especially to a millennial. But ritual is a lot like worship. Just because we stop using the word doesn't mean the phenomenon goes away. If you want to know what you worship or what other people worship, just look at their longings, their passions, and what you give your time to will reveal what you worship. And ritual is similar because it helps to calibrate our passions and our longings. For most of us, the first and last thing we do every day is look at our phones, and we spend most of our times interacting with people who aren't around us and who aren't in front of us. And to be maybe even more candid with the conversation, depression and anxiety are something that most of us struggle with. Suicide is at an all-time record high, and the demographic that's highest amongst is adolescents. And what that tells me is that many of us, and most of us, myself included, don't know how to properly live in this world and how to be human. And I think that's part of the gospel. I see Jesus as the second Adam. He is the second Adam, and he came to show us what true humanity looks like. And I think we're just maybe missing some pieces when it comes to following him well. So we brought on Christopher Miller, Dr. Christopher Miller, to have this conversation with us. He recently wrote a book called Pixelated Practices, Media, Ritual, and Identity. It is a very short book, but it is loaded. And he has done some amazing excavating work with how our pixelated practices inform our identity through ritual, and how much media is a part of our lives and how that virtual reality is hijacking our humanity. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. Thank you for joining us. If you find it beneficial, please share it with your local community, the people that you think would benefit from it. We want to continue to normalize these kinds of conversations because for so long we've disregarded them. So thank you for joining us, and thank you for being here, Christopher. Really grateful to have you.
Thank you, Shane.
Yeah. So tell us about this book. Why did you write it? And, well, who you are, because we haven't had you on before.
Okay. I'm Christopher Miller, and I'm a therapist. And I wrote the book, actually was influenced in 2009 initially by seeing people in a lobby all looking at their phones.
Hmm.
And of course, there have been books written about the phenomenon of people being engaged with their media device.
Hmm.
I spent some time thinking about it and thought I would come up with a conceptual framework or a way of looking at our experience of media in terms of the way that it affects us and the way that we affect it. So it's kind of funny. The title is Pixilate. To be pixelated means to be confused. And so I think that that's kind of what I'm aiming at with the book, is to show how we have confused reality with something other than reality. That would be the virtual, or as I call it, media.
Yeah, would you, even just starting there, how do you define media per se? I think there are a couple different ways of approaching it. So how do you approach it?
Well, I approach media in terms of seeing it as not so much content, but process. Something's going on when we're watching television, YouTube videos, movies, surround sound. I mean, it's all taking us in, and it's capturing us and violating our space, our personal being. And so media, I would define as that expansive world that we see on a screen that draws us in, seduces us.
Yeah. Yeah, and I feel that even in the midst of my boredom, or as a filler in between work projects, I'll go to Facebook or I'll go to YouTube. And what comes to mind right now is Amusing Ourselves to Death. That just kind of old prophetic book. Do you feel that your work is in line with a book like that? I mean, I only mention it due to its popularity, but he does an intentional job to try and look at because I'm inclined to use the word entertained, and I almost use that, and that's what made me think of the book. So is there any correlation when it comes to the content between your book and a book like that?
Well, there are several people that I do have respect for and have used their idea of the self and how it interacts with media. And Postman would be one, Jean Baudrillard, Marshall McLuhan, of course, and Jacques Lacan. And so I sort of come at this from a more of a philosophical point of view that's informed by psychoanalytic and counseling perspective.
Yeah, and that I mean, there's sure a whole stratum there, because I mean, at one level, you look across a lobby, you see everyone using their cell phones. You are a practicing therapy or counselor, so you're meeting with people and you're seeing a lot of themes overlap. But then you are also a father, So I imagine that this really has a lot of purchase on a lot of areas of all of our lives, including your own. So I appreciate all of that. So thank you. So media, particularly dealing with basically anything that's virtual, anything that's digital that we're interacting with and giving our time, attention, and selves to. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, how do you go about defining ritual? Because as I said in the introduction, it's like an antiquated old sort of word. But again, as I was arguing that our life is rife with ritual, especially digital ritual, and you use the language of media enmeshment, such strong language. So can you play out for us ritual and then help us to see the connection between media and ritual?
Okay. Well, ritual is a place where we meet something other than ourselves, something greater than ourselves. Ritual is also a place where we spend time transcending our personal experience and participating in something transcendent, something transpersonal or something, like I said, totally other, the capital O. And so media, the way that we participate with media is that we are engrossed, engaged, and even violated, I say in the book, by media. It's sort of it's an interesting relationship ourselves with media. And when I say media, I mean the plural, media. I'm not talking about the media left or right.
Sure.
But media in all forms. But the relationships tends to be almost like an abusive relationship. We're attached to it. We can't get away from it. If you were to get a restraining order on media, within an hour you would have broken it and violated your order to keep yourself from being involved with media. And I guess, probably the question's going to come up eventually when we talk, and we get people always ask, what do we do about it? And so I think talking more about how we're enmeshed with media will explain more about what we need to do about media.
Okay, so what I hear you saying is that ritual allows us to, it has this extraordinary power to connect us with something that's other than ourselves.
Yes.
And media, virtual realities, are hijacking that disposition, that human disposition, to be connected with transcendent reality. Because I think you're entirely right using that word transcendent, and I hadn't even thought along those lines, but that's exactly what pornography and other forms of media do. They allow me to get outside of myself in this kind of moment of bliss or sublime feeling, and I forget about the woes and worries of my world, and they entertain me, and that entertainment is kind of woven this pseudo transcendence. And that's, like a lot of people who watch porn don't just watch one video, get off, and then move along, like the binge for hours, Sure. So I think that's a really pivotal language, and I appreciate you using it.
I like the word hijacking. I believe that's accurate.
Okay, so are you also arguing that at a kind of a human level, to use a big word, anthropological level, that humans are designed for ritual and that media is just filling that gap? Or how do you see the relationship there?
Well, you hit the nail on the head when you said filling. There is a lack, I believe, in all of us, from Jacques Lacan's point of view, from a Lacanian point of view. We experience this lack that we want to fill. And when we attempt to fill it, especially in the case of the hysteric, we'll fill it, be unsatisfied with the filling of it, because the lack will still appear. And then the effort will go on to gain knowledge, gain affirmation, gain validation. And then once seemingly filled, the person will then have a lack there anyways, again. And so you're continually pursuing something that can't be, a lack that can't be filled.
Yeah, that emptiness after pornography it makes you keenly aware of the hole inside your soul. So I think that's exactly right. And even going back to work after I've just binged a few videos on YouTube, I feel the mundane texture of the work in front of me, and it loses a lot of its luster. So I think that a lot of people, when they hear the word ritual, they also think maybe language of something like mundane does come into play. But you're using this beautiful, grandiose word, transcend. So when I think of ritual, I think of maybe coffee in the morning. I think of maybe scripture reading. I think of when someone's done talking, thinking through what they just said instead of deciding to respond by impulse. So those sorts of things. But more than anything, they kind of root me to the here and now. They kind of, they're more imminent properties of existence that allow me to have allow me to connect with the concrete reality around me. Is that wrong, or how would you then qualify that with the transcendent connection that ritual has?
Well, I guess I'd reframe your understanding of ritual a bit and say that we've lost ritual in our society. It is much larger than having a sip of coffee, if you will.
Yeah.
It can be simple, but I think it's more complex than it is simple. One of the examples I use in the book about how we have a mirroring effect with what happens on the screen is when indigenous people see someone walking on hot coals, or when a person that's in the group watching that, are they actually participating in the walking on the coals? No, they're sitting there watching, but it engages and enthralls them so much that they begin to have this ritualistic experience. And so even like with church and communion, you go to communion, and it isn't an individual thing, it's a communal thing. It's something we do together.
No, that's helpful. So do you understand ritual as a communal kind of collectivistic practice, or can someone even there, right there, is ritual synonymous with practice?
Oh yes, I think so. And one of the people who endorses the book that's in it is Drew Johnson, and he talks about ritual as practice. And I do believe that it is a practice. And to get back to that, the part where you were talking about whether or not it's an individual thing or a communal thing. Well, of course it's an individual thing. We can't escape ourselves.
Sure.
Right? But it's communal also in the sense that we're participating with other people in a ritual act. So it can be one of three things, I suppose. It can be individual, it can be individualistic and communal, or it can be communal, where we typically lose ourselves in the ritual. And that's what I think we've lost. Our souls have been stolen. I really believe that's the case with our interaction and in violation by media.
No, I think that language I think it carries the punch that you want it to. I think you're being very intentional with that language. That's helpful. You use this word fusion throughout the book. Could you introduce us to fusion and what's taking place there?
Well, fusion shows that there is a process that happens between oneself and the screen. It is not just some flashing on the screen and pictures and things that we notice and things that are great or bizarre, and usually the most bizarre things become noticed and typified as the great and noticed phenomena. And Jean Baudrillard was very known for saying that, I think he said bizarre is something that reaches greatness for us. Fusion is then not about content, but about process. What's happening between the screen and yourself. So fusion is the individual experience. What I call the subject media process is more like the mass experience.
So is it that process of media enmeshment where kind of the identity, the individual identity is, as you say, getting violated and maybe even being not eradicated, but again, going back to that pseudo or artificial transcendence, we are losing ourselves to something that will never be our friend, will never be there for us, will never, have a conversation with us.
Right. Yes, I agree with that. And, one of the things that I propose in the book is that we take media with us everywhere we go. You get in your car, you go to the restaurant, you go in the door, and there it is, on the walls everywhere.
Yeah.
You go to pump gas. There's a little screen there to entertain you while you're pumping your gas. So, it's become more pervasive than when Neil Postman was writing or Marshall McLuhan was writing. Baudrillard would be the closest, I think, to, and Zizek and some other people would be more attuned to what we're talking about here, in that we have so many forms of media now. I really think it's a process of enmeshment more than engaging, but entangling us in its seduction.
No, that's helpful because Neil Postman's making the point. His famous phrase of the medium is the message, and you're saying you're right. It's not the content; it's the process of what we're giving away and what is being stolen from us as we continue to give ourselves to these virtual relationships that aren't actually relational. We're just I go back to pornography because it's such a keen illustration of I'm giving my most passionate moments to pixels. It's teaching me that others are expendable, that they're replaceable, that I can have them however and whenever I want them. It's enculturating me to a sort of humanity that is so ugly and gross. Would that be a good example, a good illustration of what you're trying to communicate about process versus content?
Yes, it would be, because that's a very engaging process that a person gets involved with. And interestingly enough that you bring that topic up, the body of media is another concept I have in the book. And it has like a three-pronged definition. And one is that, of course, as we look at the screen, things are constructed for us. So our identity is constructed, our ritual is constructed, our relationships are constructed. They're all of these relationships that we have are, in fact, built up by media. And the other thing is that we have an individual experience with media. It's not just the body of media is about how we carry our bodies around, how we dress. A lot of people, you can notice in public, will be wearing clothes that are indicative of what they see on the screen, but they don't realize how provocative or even, I would say, in my measure, inappropriate. Just because it's on the screen, they think that they somehow identify with what's on the screen, and then they go out and behave in that way. And the third definition of the body of media is that's the masses. Postman, McLuhan, the medium is the message, yes, but we take that, and again, with our body everywhere we go, and again, as far as the argument goes with virtual reality and whether or not we take it everywhere, I really think we could go on a hike and we would see trees and they would remind us of a scene from a movie, maybe Return of the Jedi or a Narnia movie or,
Sure.
or you know, something like
Lord
that.
of the Rings, yeah, a whole
Lord of the
plethora.
Yes.
Yeah, that's helpful. That we can both get a good chuckle at this, because there's a guy that you cited who used this word. He said, it was symbolic fiction.
Yeah.
That is a really powerful phrase, especially as you unpack it in the book. Okay, so I don't know how you learn how to say all these guys' names. The closest I've gotten with this guy's name was Slav Zizek, and which makes me feel like a punce, but that's what I'm working with right now.
Well, that's why I have a Ph.D. You know,
Yes.
I know these people.
Yes.
It's Zizek, Slavoj Zizek.
Yes, I will. When I get a PhD one day, I'll be able to say that man's name.
Say it now.
Until then, I'll stumble along. Yeah. Okay, so he uses a symbolic fiction, which is really kind of illustrates the second point in your definition of how we are. I mean, even that language of celebrity. That language has been inherited because they're those we celebrate as a culture. Who do we celebrate? And thus, those are the celebrities. We're designed to have role models. I mean, most of any sociological approach will look at how other humans are impacted by other humans, you know? And so when it comes to that term, symbolic fiction, could you open it up for us? Because I think you make an interesting kind of distinction in the book of maybe like older media, and I don't know if you'd use that language of media even referring to that, but of like theater coming through a town, and there'd be plays that would be put on, and there'd be certain things, but most of our role models would be those that we know. Whereas today, anybody we look up to through media isn't necessarily going to be someone we know. So could you help us to look at that a little bit better? Yeah, because I think there's a lot of explanatory power when it comes to just what it is to be human in that kind of language.
Yes. Well, the symbolic, of course, is that which represents something. We learn. You can learn a lot from Stuart Hall about representation. What we see on the screen is a representation of something. It is not the reality of something. And fiction. I mean, when we look at one of the things I do with people in therapy is I talk about the future fictive self. When we're watching media, we're in the present moment. We're not projecting into the future. We're engrossed here. And so the future fictive self, the fictional self, is someone we yearn to be like. And so I try to take people beyond the immediate self and moment and move toward a future understanding of what they can become. And so I think that media leaves us stagnant in that symbolic area, in that symbolic fiction, that we can move on beyond that place in our lives. And you know, you mentioned the theater coming from town to town. I think one of the interesting things about the church is that I think I have this right. The church initially shunned theater, and then eventually took it up as a form to communicate the life of Christ, the life, death, resurrection, and ascension of Christ. Those four elements of Christ, five, the virgin birth, life, death, resurrection and ascension.
Hmm.
And so the church used theater to do that. Now churches are using media to do that. There are churches that have a pastor who is online, and they're in several cities, and they're all watching this pastor who's online. Well, certainly he's real. He's not a fake person, but it's just the process of being so engrossed in something that's symbolic of what it means to be human, and not and a fictive reality, that we engage in. So.
Yeah, that's good. There's really no possibility for relationship at that level because
I don't
the
think
person,
so, no.
yeah, the person's being represented digitally. Okay, so so somebody listening might have the question, Dr. Miller, I like what you're saying, but surely you're not saying that all media is evil. But it sounds like that's what you're saying because you're saying it's a process. And because this process carries these fusion powers that start to take away our identity, are you arguing thus that all of media is maybe evil, just inherently evil? How would you respond to someone who might ask you a question like that?
Well, I wouldn't say that it's inherently evil. Evil is inherently evil.
Well put.
Satan is inherently evil, right? Yeah. Media is like any part of life. It is something that we can either have to have it or we have to quit it. It can be used in powerful, positive ways, but it can be used in detrimental ways. Let's see here. How do I put this? We live in a post-truth world, and we get our truth from the screen. We live in a post-truth world that says everything's relative. So if everything's relative, then everyone has their own point of view. And so is there one point of view that's funneled through media? And I would answer that question with yes. And so we don't get multiple truths. We get one impression from an experience each moment. And so, for example, and I think I'm going a little far afield from your question, but we can be watching a movie and we come to a realization that we are getting images thrown at us that really overtake us. And I'm not saying that's necessarily evil. I'm saying it's a process, a phenomenon that exists and is real. Now, when sitting and watching a movie and getting these flashes and things on the screen, it's very much like an interesting experience that my wife and I had at church, where they decided instead of a sermon, we'll have a video. And so they played a video of this guy who had been converted to Christianity. He was saved, and then he began to speak, and music began to play. And as you watch this guy speak, the camera angles would take you into different parts of his story, and the music enhanced the story. So, and if you go in a theater, surround sound takes you in. There is no way to escape it. The only way you're going to get out of there is to run out the back door, or exit the fire exit on the side, So I think that we are often caught in a place where we have no escape from media. So,
Okay.
with all that said, I don't know if I answered your question. I said a lot, but
No, I think you helped broaden things out. So what I hear you saying is that media is not inherently evil, that there are beautiful ways to use these things in very artistic and creative ways. But what you're really trying to do is show us that if we blindly use them, then they will use us.
yes,
And so you're trying to maybe send out a warning because you see it being an assumed reality in a lot of people's lives. And you see the detriment that comes along with that assumed way of living, where we're all attached to our phones. We listen to podcasts in between cars. We go to restaurants with movies. We fill up gas where there's a video playing, all sorts of things. There's constantly surrounding us. So there's an assumed reality of media. And you're just trying to give out a warning about the abuse of that gift, really, right?
yes. You know, when you said beauty, I think of Jonathan Edwards and how he said that, you know, there's the Lord's glory is in all of creation. So, I mean, and so when you bring up the issue of evil, I'm kind of take a step back from it and say, you know, it's useful, it's helpful, but it's also harmful. In Jewish tradition, there's the inclination to do good and the inclination to do evil. So in the Judeo-Christian tradition, there is a power that's evil. The evil, the absolute evil. But when you think about evil in terms of media, I don't think that you're going to, not everyone is buying that it's all evil. And I'm not saying that at all. I'm just throwing up a red flag. You know, let's look at this closer.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So that really brings us to how do we start being intentional with our practices or our rituals? And maybe another way of saying that would be, what does it look like to live embodied? Because I do think, and I've seen this in my own life, I've seen this in the life of the community around me, some of my best friends, a lot of us, myself included, again, avoid our problems by jumping into this virtual world. It'll distract me from my confusion, my pain, my responsibilities, whatever. So what does it look like to be embodied well and to create practices and rituals that really nurture us and connect us with that kind of transcendent reality that you were talking about earlier?
Yeah, well, embodiment is important. When we see our body as a vehicle, which a lot of millennials would identify with that statement.
That's really good, yeah.
My belief, and you know, is that we are bodies from which emanate the mind and the body, the soul, and so we're more than our bodies. We are our bodies, and you know, you bring up a good point about our embodiment, and it is important to participate, I think, bodily in ritual acts. Now, I came across this quote in an article I was just looking at this morning by the guy's name is Jason Glinos, and he says that the self's radical eccentricity has a radical split. And so we live in a world now where there is a shift away from the self and more of a vague understanding and a decentered understanding of what it means to be a self. So then that then comes the constructivist point of view. You know, we're decentered, we're off kilter, we're not quite in a place where we're embodied, and we realize that we are our bodies. And then the constructivist says, you know, you can be this, you can be that, you are this, you are that. I mean, everything from sexuality to career, you know, the whole span of our life is constructed. And to name one person that I really have had a lot of respect for over the years, and he's not, I don't think anybody ever mentioned yet, except for Drew Johnson, would say that they're anything near Christian. But the person that I've come to realize has a lot to say about what it means to be in our bodies and to be our bodies is Ram Dass, Richard Alpert. Ram Dass, Ramdass, which means servant of God. He talks about the spacesuit, and it's kind of humorous. He tells a story of how when we're born, we don a spacesuit. We have this, it's not a body, but it's the construction of reality that's placed on us. Our gloves may indicate part of who we are. Our sleeves, our shirts, our helmet, our shield, it all represents a part of what we are. And so if anybody gets a chance to look at Ram Dass's video on the spacesuit, I think that you'll find it both fascinating and kind of humorous, but also hitting home with the way that we construct our world and the way that our world's constructed for us.
That's really good. I hadn't ever actually thought in those terms as seeing my body as a vehicle that will take me from one place to the next, almost something I have to get like regularly checked up on so that it's in good maintenance, so that I can do what I want to actually do. Whereas Jesus uses abode language when he refers to the body in a lot of ways. It's a place where we house great treasure, and it correlates it with even our priesthood, that our bodies are a temple, which goes to reinforce the house of God. So I'm very fascinated with that language. I think that'll sit with me for a while as I turn that over. So thank you for it. So we just looked at what it looks like to be a little bit more analytical in our approach to our bodies, as well as what it looks like to start forming practices and rituals. So what does it look like for a community to start doing this intentionally? Say a few people who know each other are listening to this, or I share this with my local community. What would it look like for us to be more intentional as Jesus followers when it comes to even, like, I don't know if you want to apply it straight to spiritual formation or just basic kind of anthropology of being good humans, just living well. What does it look like for us to engage ritual well together?
Well, I knew this question would come up. It's probably the hardest question to answer. Let's see. The Benedict option. Who wrote that? Rod Dreher.
Roger, yeah.
We either cloister and refrain, or we engage and we then embrace. And so I think it's a both and, not either or.
Yeah.
I think that we need to be very closely knit as Christians. And part of that can happen like this conversation we're having right now. At the same time, I think that we need to not only cloister in small groups or in close communion with people and with God, we we also need to reach out and embrace the world. I think it was a song by Petra. I don't know, you know who Petra is?
No.
No? Okay. You're a millennial, right?
This is true.
So the body, the body being a vehicle would ring true for you, and would for many people. But to go back to what I was just going to say about, oh boy, help me out. What was I talking about?
You were talking about how Rod Dreher, more isolated or more inclusivistic, where it becomes more of an assimilation. You're saying maybe it's an either or. Well, it's not an either or, it's a both and.
Right. And so when we approach media, I just think we need to have our feelers on, you know? We need to know that it can be addictive. You know, I've worked with people who have addictions to pornography, have addictions, I think, to the screen, frankly. They spend their whole, you know, I mean, I do I do like telehealth counseling, and some people sit in their homes all day long. And you know what? COVID didn't help us, did it?
Right.
It didn't help us at all.
Yeah.
I'm still trying to think of that one point I wanted to make. But
no, it's good. No, it's okay. As you said, it's a question that every community needs to wrestle with. And you noticed something earlier. I mean, even communion is something that is often not practiced with any sort of frequency. Maybe once a month, and even then, it's even pretty individualistic the way it's practiced. So I think even for church elders or pastors or even just parishioners to consider practicing communion with greater frequency with the body of Christ, I think that has a lot of power, because that's where Jesus does really special work of making us one.
Think so. It was communion that drew me back to the church. It was communion. I was involved with Buddhism for many years. And it was going in and seeing people communing with the Lord. And every Sunday in a Lutheran church, there's communion. The whole sacrament, the whole liturgy is built around the sacrament.
Yes.
And so we can gain, I think, a lot of strength as Christians, and strength as communities of Christians, and strength as the world of Christians by communing with God. And that's not always communion the way we take it in you know, the bread and the wine, or the bread and whatever you use. It is it's a necessary part of the Christian life, not to be alone. And so for those of you who are out there who are alone, who are watching the screen and watching this, my hope is that you'll be able to find your way out and into a community that loves and cares for you as a bodily person.
Amen, dude. I really love that. That's as good a place to start drawing ourselves to a close as any. Doc, if you media, ritual, and identity. So if you were to just, I mean, in a sense you just did, but I want to point a point on it. If you were talking with somebody and they just expressed, hey, I'm deeply dissatisfied with life, and I'm starting to realize that I go to the screen to find escape, and I don't know what to do. You know, what would you say to a person who is in that sort of situation?
Well, if you're going to the screen to escape, you're not reaching for the Lord. You're not reaching for something that fulfills us. You're reaching for something that creates more of a lack, more of an emptiness, more of well, just those things.
Yeah.
And when we get together with real people in real circumstances, doing real things, whether you're protesting or you're just in a teaching moment, you know, it's important to realize that community and communion is a real thing, and we need to take hold of that.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen. I really love that. Thank you, Chris. Would you, oh man. So we always end with two questions. One is, how can people track with you? If they're interested in this book, how can they find it? And then two, how can people be praying for you?
Well, number one, the book can be found at Wipf and Stock Press. That's WIPF and Stock, STOCK Press, or at Barnes and Noble, either online or I guess you can get books delivered to a store. Let's see, there are some other places, Christian books. Let's see, Amazon, is that one?
I'm sure it is, and we'll have
a link. On Amazon. I save Amazon for the later mention because many people go there to get everything, you know.
Yeah.
But it's at several other places, especially the publishers' site.
That's cool.
And again, it's spelled Pixilated, pixelated.
Pixelated, yeah. Yeah, and how can we be praying for you, Chris?
Well, you can pray that my new book comes out and helps Christians understand the definition of the post-colonial and what that means in terms of what we've done to indigenous people as Eurocentric and Anglo-American people, and then how that language around the post-colonial is used in many places and on the street. And if you think the internet is the street, it's used all over the internet, and especially among millennials, I don't know, I work with 18 and above now, but people are using this language and they don't even know they're using it. So I hope that the language of the post-colonial can be expressed in the work that I do now for the church to understand that better.
No, that's helpful.
That works.
That's really helpful. Christopher, thank you so much for joining us. It's just been such a treat to have you on.
I really thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, good. Guys, thank you just so much for joining us as well. Thank you for tracking with us. I hope this conversation has been beneficial for you. I think it's put a lot of seed thoughts inside of me, ones that have, I think, buried quite deeply as I've been sitting with them over the last few weeks. Just what does it look like to follow Jesus together? Because so many of us are so very lonely, and we can see the symptoms of a disease, a cultural disease, but it's hard to trace it back. And I think what Christopher Miller has helped us to do is to trace it back to some of its antecedents, to some of its origins, so that we can start to kind of refurbish our lives, if you will, start to reconstruct, so that we can follow Jesus well and be known and know. So thank you for tracking with us. Thank you for being with us. All of those links will be down below for the book, for the Disruptor Initiative, etc. So thanks for being with us. This is The Naked Gospel, and we will catch you all next time.